Congratulations, everybody. We made it through another week. That feels like a major accomplishment. It seems like the last 10 days or so have been especially discouraging. We thought the pandemic would be receding by now, that all the sacrifices we've made, giving up seeing our family and friends and school and church gatherings and hugs and travel, that it would bring us kind of back to normal this fall. And that hasn't happened. We're disheartened, frightened, worried, hopeless, and so very tired. And you know what? We are still here. We haven't given up yet. That's worth celebrating. Of all the stories in the Bible, perhaps the miracle stories are the most difficult for us to contend with today. We're in the second of 3 weeks of Jesus' miracles in the gospel readings. We had parables earlier in the summer, now miracles, and we'll hear more parables after this. We 21st century Christians are heirs of the Enlightenment. When we hear stories of miracles, we look for rational, scientific explanations for them. We ask, how did this happen? We search for a reason, and if we can't find one, we're prone to dismiss miracles as exaggerated or even made up. The authors of the Bible would find our attitude baffling. To them, miracles are evidence of God's presence and activity. Every holy person works miracles as a sign that she or he truly comes from God. Ancient people are less concerned with asking, how did this happen? They're more interested in asking, what does this mean? Miracles always have a meaning. And that first century question offers us a key to miracle stories. Nobody can say for certain whether Jesus actually walked on water or how he might have done it. That isn't the point of the story. What we can say is what Jesus walking on water means, both for the people who first heard this story 2,000 years ago and for us today. It has been a tough couple of days for Jesus. At the beginning of Matthew chapter 14, he has just learned that his cousin and friend, John the Baptist, has been executed. I think Jesus might have been an introvert. When he's in shock and grieving, he wants to be by himself. He gets into a boat alone and sails off to the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee for the solitude he needs to mourn. He doesn't get it. A huge crowd walks around the lake to follow him. Jesus heals the sick among them, and when evening comes, he feeds all of them with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. At last, it is the end of the day. Jesus' work is done. He sends his disciples off in the boat, dismisses the crowd, and finally gets his alone time. Jesus spends most of the night by himself praying. He pours out his anguish to God and receives God's comfort and peace. Sometime between 3 and 6 in the morning, Jesus is ready to rejoin the disciples. The weather has been rough, and the wind has blown the boat away from shore. Jesus doesn't have another boat, so he walks across the water to be with the disciples. The disciples have not had the greatest of days either. They are also grieving for John the Baptist and afraid for themselves, worried they'll be next. They need to be with Jesus. But Jesus puts them in the boat and sends them ahead. The disciples are hurting, they aren't getting what they need, and then the wind kicks up. Great. They're up all night battling with the sail, so now they're emotionally wrung out and exhausted. This figure comes toward them on the water. It's dark and they can't see all that well. They think at first that it's a ghost. Then Jesus calls to them. It's me. Don't be afraid. Have courage. And the disciples recognize Jesus' voice. For Peter, Jesus being yards away out there on the water is not enough. He needs to be with Jesus. So Peter says, it's really you? Then tell me to come to you. Jesus does. Peter climbs down from the boat and begins walking on the water toward Jesus. For a few steps at least, he's doing it. He's walking on water. And then a gust of wind blows. Peter gets frightened, and he begins to sink. He cries out, "Help me, Lord, save me." Jesus reaches out his hand to Peter and catches him. Jesus holds on tight, and Jesus half guides, half carries Peter into the boat. When Jesus is finally with the disciples, the wind and the waves die down. They aren't safe exactly. They're still far from land, but Jesus is with them, and he brings calm and peace. To the disciples, this is proof that Jesus is the Son of God. That is one meaning of this miracle, but it's not the only one. Another meaning is that Jesus wants to be with the disciples, and he does come to be with them. Not even the laws of nature can stop him from being with the people who need him. And when Peter sinks into the water, when his fear threatens to overwhelm him, what saves him is the hand of Jesus. Peter grabs onto Jesus' hand, and Jesus does not let Peter go. Not until Peter is back in the boat. And even then, Jesus stays with him. Holding on to Jesus saves Peter. In some other year, we might notice other meanings of this miracle. There's almost always more than one. But this year, when we are grieving, scared, hopeless, and exhausted, what stands out to me is Jesus coming to be with people who need him desperately, and his hand gripping tight around Peter's until Peter is past the danger. Sometimes the hand of Jesus feels like a hand. Sometimes it is something else entirely. The story I'm about to tell is in the first person, so rest assured that it turned out all right. When I was 7, my family and several of my parents' friends and their children spent a week on the beach in North Carolina at Kitty Hawk. I think there were 6 families altogether. We drove down from Cleveland and got to the beach on Saturday. On Sunday, a hurricane made landfall. It was a low-grade Category 1, so the grown-ups decided to ride it out. During the eye of the storm, we all went down to the beach. Our group was a bunch of Clevelanders who didn't have much experience of hurricanes or the ocean. The grown-ups weren't paying attention as closely as they should have. We kids thought we were staying far enough away from the water. But an enormous wave came on shore and swept over me and 2 of the boys. The water rushing over me was the strongest physical force I have ever felt. I could still feel it in my body, pulling me backwards out to sea. The beaches in North Carolina have these wooden structures, kind of like decks, under the sand to reduce erosion. The storm had washed away a lot of sand and left the wood exposed. As I was being swept out to sea, I was on my belly feet first, and my foot struck one of the piers. I grabbed it as I passed and held on. For 7-year-old me, the hand of Jesus felt like a smooth, wet wooden pier. I held on, like Peter clinging to Jesus on the lake, until the wave passed and I could stagger back to dry land. What are you holding on to in these bitter weeks of an awful year? What is the hand of Jesus for you right now? It could be the voice of a loved one over the phone or their face on a video call. It could be time spent outdoors, the one part of the world that works exactly like it did before the pandemic, watching birds and squirrels and listening to the breeze through the trees. It could be a familiar spiritual practice or something new you've been trying. Perhaps you're not sure where Jesus is. Perhaps you feel like Peter, beginning to sink into the water. And you'll see only in retrospect how Jesus took hold of your hand and held on. Maybe you can hear Jesus calling to you, saying, "I'm here with you. Don't be afraid." What does the hand of Jesus look like? What does it feel like? That's the meaning of this miracle story for us. Jesus knows how desperately we need him, and he will do what it takes to be with us. When we begin to sink, he holds on to us and half guides, half carries us into the boat. We made it through this week, and we'll make it through the next week, and the next, and the one after that. Because Jesus is with us, gripping our hand in his, holding on with a love that will not let us go.